They seemed untouchable, the kind of couple that others admired from afar. He was the devoted husband, successful and respected. She was the intelligent, compassionate wife, the kind of woman people trusted with their deepest secrets. Together, they built a life that looked flawless. But perfection is often a mask. And behind theirs lurks something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. It all began with something small, something that seemed insignificant at first. A strange inconsistency. A passing remark that didn't quite add up. But once that seed of doubt was planted, it grew into something impossible to ignore. The closer he looked, the more cracks he found. And then, one day, he stumbled onto something he was never meant to see. What he uncovered shattered everything. The woman he loved, the woman he thought he knew better than anyone, had been hiding a past soaked in blood. A past that had never truly been buried. And by the time the truth came to light, it was far too late to turn back. What happens when the person you trust most is the one hiding the darkest secrets? How do you survive a truth so horrifying that it turns your entire world upside down? Before we get into this shocking case, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories of love, lies, and betrayal. Zafina Harrington was the kind of woman people admired from a distance. At 41, she exuded grace, intelligence, and an air of quiet mystery that made her impossible to ignore. As a renowned therapist, she had built a career out of understanding the human mind, guiding some of the most powerful and elite figures through their struggles while keeping her own life locked behind an impenetrable wall. She was poised, polished, and always in control. Those who knew her, her clients, her colleagues, even her closest friends, spoke of her with admiration, but no one truly knew her. Her past was a closed door, a subject she navigated around with precision. If anyone asked about her childhood or where she came from, she would smile, offer a vague but elegant response, and swiftly shift the conversation to something else. Most people assumed she had simply come from a privileged background, that she had always been this composed, this refined. And Zafina made sure to never correct them. Then her husband, Demonte Harrington. At 44, he was everything a self-made man should be, ambitious, charismatic, and fiercely intelligent. A real estate mogul who had clawed his way up from nothing, he turned forgotten neighborhoods into luxury developments and built an empire that commanded respect. His story was one of resilience, a man who defied the odds and carved out his own destiny. And when he met Zafina, it was as if two forces of nature had collided. Demonte had been married once before, a short-lived union in his 20s that ended in bitter divorce. After that, he had spent years focused on his career, dating beautiful women but never finding her, the one. That changed the moment he met Zafina. She wasn't just stunning, she was captivating. There was something about her that pulled him in, a quiet strength beneath her serene exterior. She wasn't like the others, she didn't fawn over his wealth or try to impress him. If anything, he was the one trying to impress her. Their romance was a whirlwind. Within months, they were inseparable, moving through elite social circles as a perfectly matched pair. They complemented each other effortlessly, Demonte, with his undeniable charm and commanding presence, and Zafina, with her refined elegance and razor-sharp mind. Together, they were magnetic. When Demonte proposed, it was nothing short of a spectacle. A private yacht, an ocean sunset, a flawless diamond ring. The kind of proposal most women dreamed of. And when Zafina said yes, their wedding became the event of the year. Lavish, exclusive, and dripping in opulence, it was attended by CEOs, celebrities, and the most influential figures in the city. To the world, they were the perfect couple. Ambitious. Sophisticated. Deeply in love. But love can be deceiving. Beneath the surface of their enviable life, there was something else. A shadow lurking in the background, something just out of sight. And while Demonte saw his wife as the pinnacle of grace and wisdom, he never imagined that Zafina's carefully curated life was built on a foundation of secrets. Secrets that, once uncovered, would shatter everything. Zafina Harrington had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of deception. To the world, she was a woman of wisdom and grace, a therapist whose gift for understanding the human mind made her invaluable to her elite clientele. But the truth was far more sinister. Her story didn't begin in polished offices or glamorous high society events. It began in filth, in suffering, in a childhood so dark she erased it completely. Zafina wasn't her real name. The woman everyone admired had been crafted from nothing, a reinvention, a fabrication. She was born into chaos, raised in violence, and molded by pain. Abuse and neglect had been constants, shaping her into something far colder than anyone could have imagined. And then, one day, she simply disappeared. No one searched for her. No one missed her. The girl she had been was gone, buried beneath the layers of identities she would wear over the years. She moved from place to place, slipping into new lives like costumes, always staying one step ahead of the past. By the time she arrived at the prestigious universities that would forge her professional reputation, the transformation was complete. She had built herself from the ground up, meticulously constructing a version of herself that the world would trust. But the monster had always been there. Watching. Waiting. Zafina didn't just understand the human mind, she controlled it. She knew what made people break, what made them desperate, what made them easy to manipulate. And she had learned that some people simply didn't deserve to live. The patients who came to her weren't just clients, they were opportunities, lonely men who had lost everything. Women drowning in depression. People on the fringes of society, struggling with thoughts of suicide. These were the ones she chose. The ones no one would miss. She had been killing for over a decade. Each life she took was carefully planned, each murder an act of precision. She never rushed, never got careless. She made sure their deaths looked natural, or, in some cases, like tragedies of their own making. An overdose. A hanging. A simple disappearance. No one ever suspected that the woman who guided people through their darkest moments was the very one orchestrating their final breaths. But it wasn't just about the kill. It was about the power. Zafina relished the control, the feeling of deciding who lived and who didn't. She kept trophies from each victim, small, insignificant things that only she knew the meaning of. A button. A strand of hair. A piece of jewelry tucked away in a place no one would ever look. She documented everything, not in journals or confessions, but in coded writings that only she could decipher. Her crimes weren't just acts of violence. They were art and no one suspected a thing. She was brilliant, careful, untouchable. A woman who moved through the world with the confidence of someone who had nothing to hide. Even her husband, Demonte, a man who prided himself on his keen instincts, had no idea who he had married. He adored her. Trusted her. Believed in the version of her that she had created. But no mask is perfect. No deception lasts forever. And as much as Zafina had spent years mastering the game, the truth had a way of clawing its way to the surface. She had spent a lifetime burying the past. But soon, the past would come for her, as Zafina had always been an enigma. She never spoke about her past before meeting Demonte, brushing off any questions with a charming laugh. "Ain't nothing back there worth remembering," she'd say, her voice smooth, her smile effortless. And for years, he accepted that. He loved her, trusted her, and never once thought to push. But love has a way of blinding people. It makes them ignore the small things, dismiss the moments that should have made them pause. The late nights when she'd come home without explanation. The way she never let anyone, not even him, see certain parts of her office. The cold, distant expression that would cross her face in rare, fleeting moments before she quickly covered it up with her usual charm. He had never questioned any of it. Until the night everything changed. It started with something small. A locked safe in their home, tucked away in the back of her personal study. It was strange, Demonte had never seen it before. He asked Zafina about it once, and she gave him a quick answer, something about old work documents, nothing worth worrying about. But something gnawed at him. A feeling he couldn't shake. One evening, when Zafina was away at a conference, he decided to find out the truth for himself. He searched her drawers, her office, places she never let him near. And then, buried beneath a stack of meaningless papers, he found the key. What he uncovered would haunt him forever. Inside the safe were things that made no sense at first. A set of keys to a storage unit. Old journals, the pages brittle and filled with handwriting that looked almost too neat, too precise. He flipped through them, expecting notes, maybe personal thoughts. But what he found was something else entirely. They were records. Stories of pain. Experiments. She wrote about people the way a scientist might describe lab rats, cold, methodical, detached. She detailed their suffering, their fears, their final moments. Some entries read like studies, psychological breakdowns of what made a person snap. Others were more grotesque, filled with descriptions of rituals, of ways to prolong agony, of what she enjoyed watching. Demonte's hands shook as he turned the pages, each word more horrifying than the last. This wasn't fiction. This wasn't a game. These were real people. And his wife, his Zafina, had written about them with a level of detachment that chilled him to the bone. Then he saw the dates. Some were from years before they met, but others were recent. Too recent. Demonte could hardly breathe as he pieced it together. He knew what he had to do. He had to know the full truth. The storage unit was in her name, an address he recognized but had never thought twice about. Maybe it was old furniture. Maybe it was something harmless. That was what he told himself as he drove to the facility, hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. But the moment he stepped inside, the smell hit him. It was thick, suffocating, the unmistakable stench of decay. The kind that clung to the walls, to the air, to his very skin. His heart pounded as he moved deeper inside. The unit was cold, unnaturally so, the hum of industrial freezers filling the silence. His fingers trembled as he reached for the first one, slowly lifting the lid. And then he saw them, severed body parts, stacked and wrapped like meat in a butcher's shop. Rotting flesh sealed in plastic bags, labeled with meticulous care. Personal belongings, watches, rings, locks of hair, even a pair of glasses, each one a grotesque trophy. He staggered back, bile rising in his throat, his mind struggling to comprehend the nightmare before him. His wife, his perfect, loving wife, was a monster, and then he saw the tapes. Lined up neatly on a shelf, each one marked with a name and a date. His hands shook as he picked one up, sliding it into the nearby player. The screen flickered to life, and there she was. Zafina. Calm. Composed. Speaking in that same soft, soothing voice she used with her clients. But the person she was speaking to wasn't a client. He was bound, his face streaked with tears, his body trembling. Demonte watched in horror as his wife comforted the man, whispering to him, stroking his hair, telling him that she understood his pain. That she could help him. And then, with terrifying gentleness, she killed him. Demonte dropped the remote, staggering back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't something that could be explained away. This was who she was. For a long moment, he stood there, his mind a war zone of emotions. Love. Horror. Confusion. Betrayal. The woman he had built a life with wasn't just a killer, she was something far worse. He thought about confronting her. Thought about pretending he didn't know, gathering more evidence, trying to understand why. But then he thought about the man in the video. About the ones in the freezer. About the ones she hadn't killed yet, and suddenly, there was no choice at all. Hands still shaking, he pulled out his phone. And then, with a voice barely above a whisper, he made the call that would change everything. I need the police. Demonte's hands shook as he dialed, his breath shallow, his mind barely able to process what he had seen. His wife, the woman he had shared his life with, was a predator, a murderer unlike anything he had ever imagined. 911, what's your emergency? For a moment, he couldn't speak. His throat was dry, his chest tight with fear and disbelief. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he forced the words out. My wife, she's a killer. You need to come. Now. The silence that followed was heavy, like even the dispatcher wasn't sure they had heard him correctly. But once officers arrived, once they stepped inside that nightmare of a storage unit, disbelief turned to sheer horror. Nothing could have prepared them for what they found. The freezers, cold metal tombs filled with dismembered remains. The personal items, keepsakes from the dead, each a sick reminder of Zafina's brutality. The journals, pages upon pages of meticulous documentation, written in the neat, careful handwriting of a woman who had no remorse. She called them lessons. Each entry detailed the way she studied her victims, manipulated them, played with their emotions until they were exactly where she wanted them. Many had once been her patients, men and women who had trusted her, confided in her, needed her. She had lured them in with promises of healing, only to strip them of their dignity, their sanity, and finally, their lives. The journals didn't just recount death. They reveled in it. She described, in excruciating detail, the terror in her victims' eyes as they realized the truth too late. Some she had poisoned, watching with fascination as their bodies betrayed them, their last moments filled with confusion and agony. Others she had suffocated, staring into their eyes as the life drained from them. But the worst, were the ones she had skinned alive. There was no pattern, no predictability. Just pure, calculated chaos. Investigators quickly realized her reach extended far beyond Ohio. There were missing persons cases in multiple states, men and women who had vanished without a trace. And Zafina had been there, moving from city to city, preying on the forgotten, the lonely, the ones no one would come looking for. At least 23 confirmed victims. And those were just the ones they found. Demonte sat in the police station for hours, numb, answering every question they threw at him. He wanted to believe there had been signs, that maybe he had missed something, anything, that could have warned him. But there had been nothing. Zafina had played the role of the devoted wife flawlessly. She had laughed with him, held him, whispered love into his ear. And the entire time, she had been hiding something monstrous just beneath the surface. Then they searched the house. The officers expected more journals, maybe another storage key. What they didn't expect was the basement. Demonte hadn't even known it was there. It was hidden, perfectly concealed behind what looked like an ordinary wall in her office. And inside was something out of a horror film. Chains bolted to the walls. Surgical tools stained with old blood. Hooks hanging from the ceiling. A chair with straps, positioned directly in front of a mounted camera. And tapes. Dozens of tapes. One by one, detectives watched them, their faces growing paler with each passing second. The footage showed everything, the torture, the psychological torment, the way Zafina spoke to her victims with kindness before breaking them piece by piece. And through it all, she smiled. They had enough evidence to end her world. The hunt was over before it even began. Zafina was in her private office when they came for her, seated across from a patient, nodding with that same warm, understanding look that had fooled so many before. The officers swarmed in, guns drawn, barking orders. But Zafina didn't resist. She didn't scream, didn't ask what was happening. She simply smirked. Took y'all long enough. She let them cuff her without a word, her patient frozen in confusion and fear. Even as they led her away, she moved with an eerie calm, as if none of it surprised her. Demonte had hoped, prayed, that she might show some regret. That she might look at him with even a flicker of the love she had once claimed to have. But as they locked eyes one final time, all he saw was amusement. Zafina had won. The trial that followed became the story of the decade. The media swarmed the courthouse, reporters desperate to capture every grim detail. Families of victims packed the seats, some sobbing, some glaring with unfiltered hatred. The prosecution wasted no time painting Zafina for what she was, a cold, calculated killer. They laid out the evidence piece by piece, displaying the remains, reading excerpts from her journals, playing the videos that made the entire courtroom recoil. Zafina barely reacted. She sat there, composed, her dark eyes scanning the room as if she were observing, taking notes. Her defense team tried to save her, arguing that she was a product of severe psychopathy, that childhood trauma had turned her into something broken, something inhuman. They spoke of past abuse, of neglect, of the horrors she had endured before she ever became a killer. But the jury didn't care. They had seen too much. The recordings. The trophies. The journal entries where Zafina bragged about her work. She wasn't broken. She wasn't sick. She was proud. Deliberations lasted just 3 hours. The verdict? Guilty. On all counts. And when the judge finally spoke, his voice was heavy with something rarely seen in a courtroom, genuine fear. Zafina Lorraine Mitchell, you are one of the most depraved serial killers in American history. You are beyond redemption. I hereby sentence you to death. For the first time in the entire trial, there was silence. No gasps, no murmurs. Just the weight of what had just been said. Zafina showed no emotion. No tears. No anger. No relief. She simply leaned back in her chair, her lips curling into that same eerie smirk she had worn the day of her arrest. And then, in a voice soft and certain, she spoke the last words the world would ever hear from her. I did what I was born to do. Demonte was never the same. Once, he had been the man others envied, the perfect husband with the perfect wife, living a life people admired from a distance. Now, he was a ghost of himself, drowning in the weight of a reality he could never escape. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, not the loving woman he had married, but the monster she had truly been. He saw the smirk she wore as they took her away, the blank stare in the courtroom as they laid out her crimes. He saw the basement he had never known existed, the chains, the tapes, the trophies of her victims. And he heard them, the screams, the desperate pleas for mercy that had gone unanswered. His home felt like a crime scene, every room tainted with the memory of her. He couldn't sit at the kitchen table without wondering how many times she had sat there after taking a life. He couldn't step into their bedroom without questioning if she had ever loved him or if he had simply been another pawn in her twisted game. People called him a hero. They said he had saved lives by turning her in. They praised him for his courage, for his strength, for his willingness to face the truth. But none of them knew what it felt like to wake up every morning with the crushing realization that the person you had built your life with was never who you thought they were. None of them knew the shame of loving a woman who had murdered 23 people without remorse. Demonte tried to disappear, but the world wouldn't let him. The media turned Zafina's crimes into a nationwide obsession. Her name was everywhere, on news channels, in documentaries, in books dissecting her psychology. Experts debated whether she had been born evil or if something had broken inside her long before the first kill. True crime fanatics pored over every detail, creating online forums dedicated to unraveling her mind. Some even idolized her, calling her a genius, an artist of deception. People speculated about her marriage, about him. Had he known? Had he ever suspected? How could someone share a bed with a monster and never feel the darkness? Strangers approached him in public, some offering sympathy, others wanting answers he didn't have. He saw the way people looked at him, some with pity, some with suspicion, as if he had been complicit simply by loving her. Even old friends hesitated, unsure of what to say, unsure if he was the same man they had always known. He wasn't. He would never be. The trial ended, the verdict was delivered, and Zafina was locked away, awaiting her execution. But for Demonte, there was no sense of closure, no relief. He had spent years building a life with a woman who had been living a double existence, a woman who had played her roles so perfectly that even he, the man who knew her best, had never seen the truth. And now, he was left with nothing but questions. Had any of it been real? The love? The laughter? The life they had built together? Or had she been pretending from the start, molding herself into the perfect wife while carrying out her brutal, calculated murders in the shadows? He would never know. And that was the cruelest part of all. Evil does not always look like a monster. Sometimes, it looks like the person sleeping beside you, the person who kisses you goodnight, the person you build a life with, never realizing they are hiding something far beyond your darkest fears. Demonte Harrington's nightmare is one we all secretly dread, the sudden, gut-wrenching realization that the person we love is not who we thought they were. That behind the laughter, the tender moments, and the carefully built life, there was a secret so horrifying it defied comprehension. Zafina had played her role flawlessly. She had been the devoted wife, the respected therapist, the woman with a warm smile and a compassionate heart. No one had questioned her. No one had doubted her. And yet, beneath the surface, she had been something else entirely. The truth was buried in the bloody journals, in the soundproof basement, in the frozen remains of the 23 souls who had fallen into her trap. People came to her seeking help, believing they were safe in her care. Instead, they became her victims, her lessons, as she had called them. She had taken their pain, twisted it, fed off it, and ultimately ended their lives in ways too gruesome to comprehend. And all the while, she had come home to Demonte, kissed him, held him, made love to him, never once breaking character. Could he have seen the warning signs? Could anyone? We like to believe that we would know if someone close to us were capable of such evil. That we would sense it, feel it in the way they move, the way they speak, the way they look at us. But Zafina proves otherwise. She proves that deception can be absolute, that some people can hide their true nature so perfectly that even those closest to them remain blind. Demonte will never have the answers he so desperately craves. He will never know if anything about their life together was real. But the rest of us are left with an even more unsettling question: how well do we truly know the people we love? Think about that. And if this story left you shaken, if it made you question the very nature of trust, make sure you like and subscribe, where we uncover the darkest truths hiding in plain sight. Because sometimes, the greatest horrors aren't the ones lurking in the shadows. They're the ones sitting right beside you.